nobody is happy about anything at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. It must be the start of Big Ten play. This is Snap Judgments. He is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. We heard from Ryan Day, Jim Knowles. Will Howard seemed pleased about a lot more things, but the coaching staff, not so much.
Sometimes, a lot of times, like Ohio State will play a game where it wins by 1 billion, and there are like 2 or 3 things within the course of that game that people get hung up on in a bit of a negative way, which like I understand because you're projecting forward and you don't want to see it happen against a better team. But I always say to myself, like, man, just like enjoy the win, right? Enjoy the win. And then Ryan Day gets in there on Tuesday and says, I feel good about nothing. I'm confident, but I don't feel good about anything as Ohio State goes into Big Ten play.
That was the part that really threw me for a loop was it's like sometimes you leave and it's like, man, was Snap Judgments on Saturday, was that too critical? Was that too much nitpicking? Maybe it was. Let's see what they say on Tuesday. And then it was like, nope, nothing is good enough right now. And I think that's like, it's fine, right? He's the head coach of Ohio State. They are starting a new journey as start of Big Ten play. That is really how he should be acting. But it just is kind of amusing because I feel like I have said over the previous couple of weeks on Tuesdays that, Berm has mentioned, I don't know, Ryan Day seems more locked in, more focused. And I'm like, and that has not been my take. I feel like he's been a lot more loose and embracing some of the big picture stuff. And then today was one of those like flip the switch, ultimate locked in version of Ryan Day days.
Definitely. He is setting a new tone, I think, for Big Ten play, which I believe is necessary, right? Like the schedule has been what it has been. And like it's like, to repeat the point, it's like not Ohio State's fault. They were supposed to have played a marquee non-conference game and then that team joined the conference. So like they weren't seeing that happen.
And they weren't going to be good anyway.
They're whatever. Certainly would have been a better test than Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall posed Ohio State. And while I think Ohio State has largely played very well, and I think in a lot of ways kind of answered the call from Ryan Day to be the hardest playing team in the country, there has been enough there to probably focus in on and say like this, and this really had to be ramped up now that we're going into Big Ten play. So that was very much the vibe that I got from both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles. Yeah,
and to take it further, Jim Knowles, if you want to be unhappy about some of the breakdowns in the first half defensively, clearly the defensive coordinator was because they did not name a silver bullet of the day.
I thought that was just like
an oversight.
Yeah. Like there was an offensive player, co-offensive players of the game, special teams player of the game, and no defensive player of the game. And Jim Knowles said, we had guys who graded out champions, but no one rose to the silver bullet of the game level. I feel like I could have picked one. Like I thought Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs, I thought popped a little bit. I think he could have picked either of those guys. I'd imagine they graded out champions. But I do like, especially for like this defense is so good and going to be very good, that when like a 1% chance even of you like being able to be critical of the way they played arises, you really have to harp in on it, I think, which is what Jim Knowles appears to be doing. He did not put it squarely on the players. He did put it on himself. He said he could have called a better game in the first half against Marshall. I certainly agree with that. But he said the second half of that game is, I forget the exact quote, sort of like, we did what we're supposed to do. Yep. So they figured it out on the fly, but definitely a slow start and one that I think Jim Knowles will use as some teach tape for the players and for himself as they move forward.
We made that point the last time we were in here, Bill, on Wednesday night when Ryan Day was talking about, sometimes love doesn't feel like love. And Jim Knowles' version of that was, he said that they had to speak truth. So his evaluation was that they could play a lot better and that they didn't want to hand out whatever awards come along with being a silver bullet of the day. There's a lot of things, champions dinners on Sundays and, sometimes it's gear and sometimes this. Like, they weren't getting the pats on the back for that performance, which I think, like, in some ways, I'm standing here thinking maybe they're being too hard on it.
I get it. Like, I agree with the general assessment of, like, yeah, there were 2 drives in there that weren't great. And if the bar is, I think the bar is dominance in the mind of Jim Knowles, that wasn't dominance for 4 quarters. So if that's your bar, then that's your bar. And I guess you have to respond in kind, right? So, like, maybe it would seem a bit hyper-reactive to respond that way to a game where you only gave up 14 points and I think like 3 yards per play or something like that. Right. But the points did happen. Those 2 prolonged touchdown drives did happen. There were moments within the game where Ohio State was not doing a good enough job of getting off the field on 3rd down. It wasn't merely that the offense was a quick strike offense that wasn't holding the ball for that long on Ohio State's part. It was that the defense was allowing Marshall to stay on the field a little too much. So I think it's good. I think it's like, it's one of those games where maybe a coach would never admit to wanting to have, and Jim Knowles was kind of asked, like, hey, do you like the fact that you had a game like this? He's like, no, I don't want to have a game like this ever. But I actually think it can be beneficial so long as you take the lessons learned and grow from it.
Then, yeah, he dismissed that notion, and then after doing so was like, Bear Bryant made this point a long time ago. And if you're going to learn, do it in a win. Like, that's a good time for it. And I look, the opportunity is right there to get Ohio State's attention again and say, Michigan State, it's on the road. It's the start of Big Ten play. They have all these things here, and they look at Saturday and they have teachable moments on film. I think that's a good thing. A little bit of reality check is probably too hyperbolic as well for what happened on Saturday, because they won by 35, and all three phases of the game had some things to feel good about where they didn't. With Jaden Fielding, there was a little bit of a lower body issue that probably should have told the coaching staff about a little bit earlier before he went out there and kicked the third one out of bounds. But we know he was working through that. Don't know what his status will be for kicking on Saturday, either kickoffs or field goals. We'll see. Probably not as pressing as Tylan Williams' status, who is day-to-day and expected to practice later on Tuesday.
I thought that was encouraging to hear that he was at least going to be out here on Tuesday. And I think when Ryan Day, while never really divulging much in the way of injury information, I think with timelines is fairly straightforward. So if it's day to day, like I believe that, I think it'll probably be a case of going through the week and them deciding whether or not they feel like they need him to play, right? I think if Ohio State was playing Iowa or Oregon this weekend, it wouldn't be a question. But Michigan State, although it is a Big Ten team and although it is on the road, I think does not present a tremendous threat offensively to Ohio State's defense. So I think it'll just be a monitoring situation to see how Tyleik feels, and then ultimately if it's worth kind of pushing it when they go. I could see it being a situation where like he travels and he dresses, and then like they make the decision right before the game whether or not he should play, and then hopefully within the course of that game, if they decide to not play him, they don't feel like they need to throw him out there at any point.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that before with the way Ohio State's been managing injuries, even this year with Donovan Jackson going into week 2 against Western Michigan. That approach, taking it all the way up to kickoff before making a final determination. Just because you're available doesn't mean that you're going to play. Jim Knowles sounded more optimistic about Tyleik Williams playing. He was asked about that defensive tackle depth, the evaluations that they had from Saturday, who would start. Dan Hope asked him specifically if Taiwan Malone would be the starter based on that performance on Saturday, which was easily the most encouraging day that he's had since he got to Ohio State. Would that be in line for him to start? And Jim Knowles said, well, we're hoping that Tyleik is going to play. So yes and no.
I thought both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles, though, seemed pretty high on what Taiwan Malone put out there last week. I think I would agree with any assessment that he was probably the defensive tackle who sort of popped the most in that game. It was, as we talked about on Tuesday morning, like a little disheartening to see an opportunity for that depth to kind of show up, especially against what should be an overmatched opponent. And it didn't really happen for the defensive tackles outside of Taiwan Malone. And Ryan Day, I think, in not so many words, sort of felt the same way, said there was some good, but need more consistency there, and are looking for a lot of growth and progress this week going into this game against Michigan State. But it does seem like the one guy who did sort of give them what they were hoping to see was Taiwan Malone. So even if Tyleik Williams plays, like obviously you're going to want to play more than 2 defensive tackles in that game. So I am now on alert for 1, Taiwan starting if Tyleik doesn't play, but 2, him being that maybe third guy into the game now, even if Tyleik does play.
There's going to be 2 ties starting.
Too many ties. All right, I take it back. No more ties.
Yeah.
Too many ties
to
keep track of.
It's real quirk of this roster.
Tie, and tie.
That you have to be a tie.
Just like all the Joshes on the offensive line.
Tackle. That's some great analysis here on Snap Judgments. You can only find that on the podcast.
Right.
You were curious, Bill, to switch to the offensive side of football about the evaluation, the process, the development of the downfield passing attack, what Ryan Day thought about that from a big picture perspective, and what Will Howard is working on to narrow it down in practice. What did you make of their answers to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not curious about it in any kind of way that is like concerned. Just thinking about the evolution of the offense and how teams might start to defend Ohio State now that they have established this sort of run the ball RPO identity where there's a lot of quick passing game that turns into explosive passes. That's great. If that keeps working, just keep doing that. I don't have any issue with it. But Ryan Day said they want to be able to attack the entire field. There have not been I don't even say like much in the way of opportunities. I just feel like they don't feel like they've had to really try to stretch the field vertically yet with these teams that they played. And those moments will come when they have to. But Ryan Day seemed very confident in it. Will Howard seemed very confident in it. Said like when they do it in practice, it looks pretty good. That Will has been a fairly consistent downfield thrower in practices. Will Howard himself said that he is constantly working on that. I know like people have gone back and watched some of the Kansas State tape of Will, and maybe that wasn't necessarily a strength of his game. I think what we have seen so far and what we saw a little bit of in practice or heard about in practice, like I find that encouraging. The ball that he threw to Jeremiah in the first game, I know wasn't a touchdown. That was a beautifully thrown deep ball, right? So it's definitely there. Maybe Michigan State's the team to challenge them to do that a little more. I'm not so certain of that. Maybe that'll be more of like an Oregon game proposition, because even Iowa is sort of structured to not give up big pass plays, although they have given up a few big pass plays this year. So we'll see. Like I think it will start to emerge. I think it's just sort of the natural progression of this offense that they're kind of starting a little closer to the line of scrimmage, and it'll continue to expand as we get further and further into the season. But there's no concern within the building, I guess is probably the best way to say it. They think when the time comes, they'll be able to do it. I feel like defensive coordinators more likely than not are going to be content to sit with safeties deep down the field and force Ohio State to at least march down the field. Now, the problem with defending Ohio State in that way is that they can, when they're stretching you out with some of this RPO stuff, that's what's turning a 10-yard completion into a 70-yard gain. So that's still getting pretty vertical once you turn up field and Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka are running away from people, or Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. Like they're manufacturing that without the ball having to travel 50 yards through the air. So like maybe that's just the way that it's going to be. And it's certainly going to be successful if that's the case, because I don't think that you can defend Ohio State 53 and a half or 53 and a third yards wide without giving up something. Like down the road, there's going to be opportunities. Now, we'll see what that looks like on Saturday for what Michigan State chooses, but I suspect it's going to be sitting deep. Yeah, I get like sort of aesthetically, it looks a little different than what we're used to, right? Like Ohio State has been a more vertical offense in the past than it is right now. All I care about is whether or not you're explosive, and they're definitely that. So as long as that continues to be the case, I'm not super hung up on how they go about doing it.
Right. Yeah. Did you learn anything else on a Tuesday at the Woody?
Just a lot more praise for Carnell Tate and the job that he's doing without the ball in his hands. Like this is maybe some of the best stuff we've seen from a receiver without the ball in his hands since like the Terry McLaurin days, I think, right? Like I know that's high praise in this program, but I've been super impressed with what Carnell Tate has done as a blocker. And Will Howard even pointed out stuff that's a little harder to see if you're not like watching all 22 film, which is how Carnell Tate is able to influence defenses with his route running, even when he's not getting the ball. So he is very much a kind of like do everything guy for this offense. And maybe it's not popping with receiver production just yet, but when he keeps doing that, the ball will find him. And I know like watching the TV copy on Saturday when he caught that one ball over the middle, like after he set a nice block and then they were intentional about getting him the ball. And like Brian Hartline was super pumped up about it on the sideline because like they want to reward that kind of play within this offense. So Carnell Tate's receiver production is coming, but in the meantime, he has been super impactful for this offense in ways that I guess maybe are a little less obvious sometimes.
Yeah, and some of the roster transition that Ohio State had to make was that Julian Fleming was really good. That's why he played so many snaps for Ohio State over the last couple of years. And the yardage and reception totals may not have been whatever anybody ever envisioned for Julian Fleming, but why did he remain a key starter, a key cog, was because he could handle some of the blocking on the perimeter in a way that was maybe ahead of Marvin, ahead of Emeka, ahead of the others. Not that they were unwilling, but that was what he really hung his hat on. So if Carnell becomes evolutionary version of Julian Fleming, where the receiving lives up to that sort of billing, the 5-star billing that Julian once had for this team, that's going to be really, really dangerous.
Sure is, because he's also out there with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka. So like, have fun, Big Ten defenses.
Yeah, it's a new thing every week, and it is a new week. Ohio State certainly taking the start of Big Ten play and a trip to Michigan State on Saturday at 7:30 very seriously. There's a business-like mindset in the Woody right now. It's you can feel it.
You can feel it. They're not wearing suits, but they are still very much about their business.
Business casual.
That's right. Business casual.
Yeah. they're going to be on the practice field later. We're going to have more coverage coming your way on the podcast daily. Snap judgments are done, though. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again on the daily tomorrow.